We're just going to wait for a minute or two to let people join us, and we'll get started here in less than 30 seconds.
It does feel like the period of time that we should talk about the cello, if we're going to talk about the cello.
Yeah.
We've agreed it's the coolest of the string instruments.
Yes.
Like that.
Definitely viola is the unloved middle child.
The awkward in between
So
stages of the life cycle of a string instrument. It's the tween of strings.
It's underrated. Underrated.
I mean, they don't like make amazing music for viola, or they didn't make.
Not as much, it's true.
Yeah. All right. Let's get started. So welcome to another Build Better webinar, this one on supply chain. And when the supply chain is in the news, that's usually a bad state to be in. Usually supply chain is something you kind of want to be a little bit in the background. Nobody's talking about it. That means you're doing your job well. But since it's been in the news, it seems like it'd be great to really talk about what's going on in supply chain as a potentially a new battlefront for geopolitical conflict amongst tariff conflict and all sorts of other things that we're going to chat about today. So excited to introduce our array of panelists here today. And we're kind of going to go around and have folks share a little bit about their background and maybe provide a perspective on what's keeping supply chain leaders up at night right now. Ilya, you want to kick us off?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. Ilya Levtov, founder and CEO of Craft. We're a software platform that builds supply chain resilience with 3 layers to the platform, a data fabric, an AI-driven analytics layer, and ultimately workflows that help enterprises take action to make their supply chains more resilient.
And what are supply chain leaders, what's keeping them up right now?
The key topic we're seeing is relating to geopolitics, especially the relationship between the United States and China, but also Ukraine, the war there, and just an awareness that it's less predictable to be assured of the supply that companies are ever more reliant on going forward. Add to that the change of government administration and the threat of tariffs. And it's really all up in the air for supply chain leaders in 2025 about what's going to happen with their supply.
All right. Drew, you want to go next?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Drew Shoemaker. I'm the account manager for our supply chain risk management practice at Anglicotech. We're a services firm that does supply chain consulting and services for mostly U.S. government, but also defense industrial-based customers. We've been in this space for about 2 years now. I also run 2 government programs supporting 2 government agencies currently in the supply chain risk management space. And I think I would just like to echo what Ilya said. Geopolitics and the change of the administration is really disrupting, I think, what the supply chain looked like even just weeks ago. There's been some realignment and some focus on the supply chain as a locus of competition and conflict. And I think that if business leaders and supply chain leaders aren't taking a fresh look at their supply chain in light of what's happened in the last 6 or 8 weeks, I think they're really accepting some risk that they don't need to be doing.
Can we just like needle in on you, both Ilya and you, Drew, mentioned like the change in the administration, as even just in the last few weeks, people are rethinking what specifically is driving that. Is it fears about, I mean, I imagine for the defense industrial base, it's not tariffs because all the stuff is made in the US to begin with. So like, what is the thing that people are concerned about with the change in administration?
Yeah, so it may be true that some of those, the primes in the first tier are in the United States, but some of those lower second and third tier suppliers are located internationally. And some of those raw goods we are importing. And I think that
okay, so it's tariffs concerns primarily.
It is tariff concerns. I mean, counterfeit, and we've got all the same old concerns that we've had for a while, but I think the tariff concern is really moved to the forefront with this change in administration, for better or worse.
Yeah. I just
So-
want to let Phil introduce himself before we get started, and we'll get back to you.
Oh, yeah. So I'm Phil. I'm a co-founder and chief strategy officer of a company called Cofactor. We're a supply chain risk management and traceability platform, providing an end-to-end solution for basically management, procurement, storage, and then kitting for critical industries. So a lot of A&D, med tech, automotive, robotics, stuff like that. I mean, I can sort of piggyback on this theme and say a big concern that our customers are seeing on supply chain, and we're very electronics heavy on the system of balance for a lot of our customers, and so multi-sourcing, country of origin, right? Where are these things coming from? And then thinking about the sort of tiered supply chain, it's a lot of tariff modeling and manufacturing modeling, sort of saying, hey, what are going to be the implications of moving facilities as we either nearshore or reshore our manufacturing processes? And so there's a lot of who do you trust in the industry right now? And then on the other side of that, anything that's going out, all these new concerns of like, I really need to demark all of my critical components. I want to retain IP. So it's like, what does the supply chain mean? And then sort of sending those into the field. How do you maintain the ownership of that supply chain and the IP connected to it?
All right. Thanks, Phil. Ilya, you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, just and on your question around what does the change of administration mean, and Drew talked about tariffs, which is of course just a big direct economic question mark we've all got. What is stuff going to cost next year if these tariffs come in or not? The other one I would add is sanctions, and the notion of tit for tat sanctions, where for a while the US has been running and expanding a list of Chinese companies that key US companies are not allowed to export anything to. Well, two can play at that game. And many of you may have seen, the story of Skydio, the US drone company, being blocked and sanctioned in a way by the Chinese authorities, saying, well, now Chinese suppliers, including critical component suppliers like the batteries, are no longer able to sell anything to Skydio. So this idea of the supply chain being weaponized and the government's actually saying who you can or cannot supply to could potentially, bring very big threats to supply in the coming years.
And so we talked about what's keeping leaders up at night now, but what should be keeping them up at night? Is that like your perspective, Ilya, that maybe they haven't gotten there yet, thinking about how sanctions could escalate, or does anybody have additional things to maybe add?
Well, I would just say everyone we're talking to sees it and is very concerned and worried about it, but it's figuring out, what do I do about it? Both tariffs and sanctions mean that anything you can do to reduce your dependence on China in your supply chain is good, but how do you do it at a reasonable cost and with other assurance? Just a small plug for Craft, that is where we help people vet new suppliers at high scale very rapidly with high quality and great efficiency. But it's a very big problem to solve.
Yeah, I would toss in there that as we probably where are the risk nodes in my supply chain and how much visibility do I have? This is going to start to real themes are going to develop in this conversation, and I think we've had a lot of trust in a tiered supply chain, and all of a sudden that trust is maybe eroding because of things like, oh well, if I have components that are coming from what I consider to be a denied party or my government considers to be a denied party, all of a sudden my ability to offer a product to the market is severely limited, if not entirely destroyed. And so you kind of have these concerns where you start having to think beyond the dock that you normally think of, and you go, okay, through the nodes of my manufacturing, through the nodes of my supply chain, where are those risks? Do I have visibility into their supply? And I think that's kind of creating an increased burden on OEMs for sort of finished systems to be deployed that maybe they didn't have to attack so rigorously before.
All right. Drew, anything to add there about what supply chain leaders should be worried about that maybe they aren't yet?
Yeah, so I really do think that they are worried,
Okay.
and I think they are worried rightly so. But I think that it's not without hope, right? That engineering a resilient supply chain is possible. It just takes, some investment. But, and there's always that push and pull between kind of just-in-time inventory management and just-in-case inventory management. And what the right mix of that looks like is going to, make the difference between a competitive and an uncompetitive firm in the market. But the technology and the services are coming online to make that possible, and to make that a possibility for even smaller firms with the right focus.
Great. So maybe we'll dive into some more of the details. So Philip, I know you're really focused on the parts and the components part of the supply chain. Why is it so tough for companies to really know their supply chains at that piece, part, and component level?
A glut of data, I would say. It's really hard to decipher where you should care about something. I was on a call with a customer the other day, and they were very, very concerned about lead time being a false indicator of supply chain resilience. And when you're dealing with commercial off-the-shelf components, how you sort of vectorize your risk is something that can be really challenging. And a big reason why people use Cofactor is sort of say, oh, well, is it multi-sourceable? Is it, what's the life cycle of this component, right? Like those PCNs have come out. Am I getting sort of top priority in being alerted that there might be a challenge in the future of sort of tracking down this component that's critical to my manufacturing? And so when we're thinking about the sort of baseline of like, literally, do I have the parts? Do I have the things that I need for clear to build, right? Just managing that data, understanding that sort of available data in the market, and then reconciling, internal systems. Do I have resilient internal parts? Are my libraries up to date? Am I aligning my demand? Do I understand my manufacturer's requirements, and meshing those things together? It's really easy in complex systems to miss one of these points and create a bottleneck that is an insurmountable challenge to getting to market, right? And so it's for us and our customers, there's just a lot of data, and figuring out what's important, surfacing those concerns, is something that is just challenging in complex manufacturing.
Got it. And I know, Ilya, you're looking at a level above that, maybe, which is maybe thematically across multiple risk factors. Why is transparency across, maybe talk a little bit about those risk factors, and why transparency is really hard at that level?
Yeah, so pulling up to the supplier intelligence level, we're looking at about 14 different risk factors on suppliers. The first and most obvious is obviously financial risk, but looking at it in many more advanced ways than just pulling a credit report from a credit rating agency, kind of the old way, and instead looking at, multiple, like, call it alternative signals, like, does that company have high or low management turnover? Is the headcount going up or down? The number of job openings, they're growing or shrinking? What are the news and social media signals coming out about that company? Not to mention, what signals are we getting about where they are conducting certain operations in the world, like a really robust location layer. Just similar to Philip's point, the sheer amount of data that in this digital world can be generated is both, on the one hand, a great advantage. It allows you to see things you previously couldn't, but only if you can process it. And this is where, really AI is the only thing that can solve it, which is why, the world we're all in here is such an exciting application of AI, because the amount of data you've got to process. But just a couple more thoughts on why it's difficult. Shipping is still largely offline. No one's really cracked the electronic bill of lading, and so pieces of paper are moving around on crates in triplicate, and that's a challenge. And then when you try to get data from suppliers by asking them, you're often not getting the full picture back. So these are some of the elements that lead it to be a challenge, we find.
All right. And then Drew, I think you might even be kind of coming at it from a different angle. Maybe you could share a little bit about how you see transparency being really hard for your customers and government sector.
Yeah, so I think one thing that most of our customers are starting to understand is that the supply chain isn't static, right? And a snapshot in time look at your supply chain isn't going to cut it. If you've started an acquisition program for a weapon system, what your third tier supplier is doing at one moment what their ownership looks like, and you know where their manufacturing processes are located changes daily and weekly. So this idea of continuously monitoring the supply chain, of doing more than just point in time assessments, and understanding how your risk posture has changed, and then creating that decision space on what to do moving forward. And these tools that are coming online are absolutely fantastic. But we've also found that it's important to have somebody that's asking the right question, right? And having that person, you know, letting these technologies do what they do well, and then letting, you know, those who have these kind of acquisition experience and supply chain experience, you know, be a value add on top of that. And I think that I think that that's the way to get at this problem is that let the people do what they're good at, let the technology do what they're good at, and I think that's how we're going to get our hands around these next few years of supply chain competition.
Yeah. I just wanted to piggyback on that. The letting the strategic players be strategic, and the intensity of concern on continuous monitoring. Requests from our customers saying, you know, I absolutely need to focus on the top 10%. The bottom 90%, I never want to look at. If there's a problem, text me. Like that. And that level of, I want to get a text message on my personal phone if anything below this line ever goes slightly wrong. And that's a level of annoyance that I would not have imagined even 3 years ago that someone would be requesting. You know, and that's I think a big shift in the way that people feel about the supply chain right now.
That it's a higher risk, and resiliency is essentially on the line. Yeah, so I think like resiliency as a theme is kind of a way of thinking about, like if you think about geopolitical related challenges, tariffs, sanctions, all of that. Like one of the core things that's been around for a while is just thinking about resiliency. Like they kind of all go into that same bucket. And so I think that's a top concern. And, you know, you each have different perspectives, having worked with different customers, having seen inside of a lot of different companies how they think about resiliency. Maybe you would share what you think best in class resiliency looks like, and maybe provide our audience with some, you know, like specific ideas of things that you think would constitute best in class. Phil, you want to get us started?
Sure. I mean, no data. Like I think we have great data. I would never trust any individual data source. I think like utilizing data, right? Aggregators of data, normalizers, cleaners of data, right? That's where we are. You've got tools that have existed for a long time, predicting life cycle and things like this, right? Like everything is moving so quickly right now that I think having a holistic view of what's happening in the world and really leveraging every data opportunity that you can for internal processes and external data is like super, super clutch, right? And sort of being able to say, hey, I can't think about one indice as any sort of read for risk or reliability inside of my supply chain. It's just not enough. And so I think like right now we're seeing really capable teams who have amazing business intelligence tools, integrating us into those tools as another sort of data layer. And I think understanding the provenance, the reliability, the historic reliability of that, it's such a multi-vectored, complex sort of universe that we are operating in. Supply chains are now supply meshes that sort of the more that you can understand, the more that you can automate and then surface concerns. That's just a huge difference, and a lot of organizations are still running on spreadsheets.
Yeah, so Excel,
not point time. Right, totally. Yeah. Like Smartsheets is like a big step up from where some people are right now, and that's just not a viable way to continue to operate in a robust way.
All right, who's got something else to add to best in class?
Yeah, I'll build on that. First, I just very much agree that to have the data, the information, the insight, give yourself visibility. You know, have a dashboard and a clean sheet of glass ahead of you as you're flying the plane, rather than no instruments and you're in a cloud, flying blind, which is how it has been. Is one big step forward. Of course, then it's about what you do with the data. that creates value. And what we see being important and successful is scenario planning. Have a sense of what might go wrong, especially in that subset of suppliers that are crucial, where your revenue at risk is highest. And because, as Phil said, it's not feasible to monitor an entire supply chain of 20, 30, 50,000 at the same level. You don't need to. There is a triage that you do to focus on the top, several hundred or maybe 1,000 most strategic suppliers, and then create scenarios for what could go wrong and be prepared for those. So that's what we see, smart companies doing, and this includes creating scenarios around, how could I rebalance my supply chain, a scenario where it's less dependent on China or Asia. That goes into it because who knows when there could be a conflict there. So scenario planning is a big key to resilience we see.
All right, Drew, anything to add?
No, I would just echo that last point. So there's been some development with these digital twins of supply chains where you can run those what if scenarios, right? So you can pull out risk from countries, from commodities, from individual companies, and run those what if scenarios and engineer a supply chain that is more resilient from the beginning. And it's obviously easier to do that prior to one of these, one of these instances happening, prior to a sanction being administered, prior to some disruption, a ship getting stuck long ways in the Suez Canal. It's easier to build a supply chain that is resilient up front than it is to mitigate these disruptions on the back end.
Yeah, so I guess like a question that comes to mind for me as someone who's less of an expert on the space than this panel is, this sounds like a lot of work. And I imagine there can be a tension between how deep you go in your scenario planning and how detailed those scenarios plans are with like the everyday work of supply chain and like, are my lines on today? Do I have parts for tomorrow? And so what do you see kind of the like maybe they're not the best, but it's like the best value in class, if that makes sense, like the right kind of ratio of that tension. Does anybody have a perspective to maybe share or give advice on that tension?
I would just say you're completely right. I mean, supply chain and procurement is forever caught in a battle between being strategic and looking over the horizon versus tactical and dealing with what we've got to do today, particularly procurement, right? And we think the answer is simply technology, because it really is all about how you can do what previously would have taken 3 people with only 1, because you only have 1, or you need those 2 other people to go and deal with what's happening today and empower the 1 person that's going to look over the horizon with powerful technology and AI to get more done. For just small example, when we're helping a customer vet a high value supplier, we've got that process down from about 3 hours to 7 minutes. That frees up a lot of time to focus on the more immediate thing while still paying attention to the future.
That's a great segue into our next topic, which is what the role AI has to play in supply chain risk assessment and mitigation. So that's one perspective, is just how much time savings, and it maybe allows you to do what you should be doing, but it's hard to create the space for. The fires are always like, you attack the fires first, right? And so Phil or Drew, do you have anything to add around the role you think AI has to play here in addressing these challenges or making more resilient supply chains?
I mean, I think it's great that Ilya and I are both on this panel, because we're kind of the 2 extremes of this really like bottom up versus top down sort of understanding the universe that hopefully in the middle a beautiful supply chain exists. But like our application of AI, and I think it's a necessary application of AI, is very unopinionated and incredibly deterministic. And I think that's a bit of a counter move to the way that people normally imagine AI as a sort of creative co-pilot-y thing. But our application of it is just this bulk of communication. If something's running late, if something's been decommitted, if there's a partial shipment on the way, if there's any sort of issue with these just massive communications across thousands of lines, how do you figure out what you should pay attention to and have that strategic mind pop in and go, oh my God, something happened? And that's not just the shipments, that's also change notifications, that's updates to a part in any sort of variety, that there's a lot moving at any given time. And so our application of AI is really about tracking, documenting, and capturing so that you have all of the relevant sort of compliance documentation, test documentation attached to everything. So if you do have an error, when you're thinking on your supply chain and forward traceability, you have that backwards traceability too. And that all just has to be dead on accurate. And so that's where we've really invested, which I'm sure is very, very different from a more strategic sort of like overhead view that I'm really curious to hear, Ilya, how you're thinking about it. And Drew, maybe how you're applying these things or working with your customers to apply these things.
Sure, and so I'll jump in. Just to go back just a little bit, that tension between kind of current ops and then that looking over the horizon at risk. And we stood up something called the Supply Chain Resiliency Operations Center to do just this, to let your folks in supply chain and logistics and your acquisition folks focus on the day-to-day, getting your products to customers, and letting us do the resiliency piece of this. And the only way that we can do that across 6, 7, 8 supply chains and different customers is with AI and machine learning enabled systems. We use these to do, what it would have taken teams and teams of people, and to bring that inside the company would be just cost prohibitive. So we create these economies of scale by having folks who are specifically interested in sectors of the economy and geographic locations, empowering them with AI and machine learning tools, and then creating this resiliency product that we can provide to our customers so they can focus on, getting their goods to their customers.
What do we see on the kind of the horizon for AI? Like, where do you think the frontier is for AI and supply chain, and where it could go in the next 5, 10 years?
I'll take a stab at that one and say predictive, right?
Yeah.
Just to process all of this data, put an AI brain on it, and it's going to say, all right, you've got a 15% chance of this happening, 28% chance of that happening, and then even proposing responses and eventually automating. That is the intelligent, autonomous supply chain that we're driving towards, and that we see as a very exciting possibility in the next few years.
Essentially, you want to create a member of the team that is doing that strategic work, and then essentially providing, like, here's all the reports, or here's all the insights from the strategic work and the areas that we should focus, and bubbling that up.
100%. It's the agentic AI that's moving so rapidly right now. It's so exciting. We've got a whole slew of experiments with that, and they're just extremely promising. Exactly what you just described.
Yeah, the sort of the predictive and then the proactive solutioning, right? And I think that's a big part of it. Like, we deal a lot with electronic components, and so you go, oh, obsolescence concern, limited supply. I want parts alternatives, right? Like, literally tell me what else I can get on the market that might do this job. Right now, for us, that's really about identify your parameters, back into it, like use AI to siphon through a bunch of data. But there's no way that we're going to make a call that says, hey, you can swap these ICs, because that is a bold move without a lot of knowledge of the sort of environment, the application, the general design. And I think there's this interesting thing where it's like, yes, you can see a future where really complex analysis is understood to say, hey, we actually know the system well enough to proactively identify and then recommend a change. And the exciting thing is when we get to the point that there's enough trust and accuracy in those systems, that it's more the individual in the organization kind of deciding how much they want to be involved, where you can load balance what you're being strategic about versus what you're being responsive about. And I think that's that's kind of where we go, because we're never going to replace those leaders, right, in supply chain, but giving them an opportunity to really like master their domain, have a really solid idea of what's going on, and then kind of load balance themselves to optimize the success of their organizations. I think that's like the sweet endpoint that we all hope for.
Awesome. Maybe as kind of a point to end on, since we started this way, a little bit mentioning tariffs, I think nearshoring is a pretty hot topic right now as it relates to the new administration. And I know, Philip, that's something that is particularly of concern in the electronics space. How tariffs likely mean that people are going to go find different suppliers, that their supply chains will be disrupted in some way. Maybe they find different vendors, et cetera. So how can companies quickly vet and bring on new suppliers without cutting corners or being, keeping resiliency in mind in a world where they may happen to make some quick choices?
I mean, I had a lot of conversations about this with people that I trust. And I think the kind of unfortunate thing is like, you can't beat a site visit. Like, it still is like, oh, you kind of need to go and assess the risk. Now, that being said, it's like, what PPAP services do they offer that gives you transparency into what their processes are, where you can say, hey, there's a little bit more reliability here. What kind of sort of vendor rating systems can you get access to, right? So you've got the really strong ones where you're like, denied party, that's an F- across the board. But then you have we sort of do monitoring of how reliable are these vendors, right? Based on data, based on their actual like delivery, right? And so you can do some of that. I also think at the Build Better conference, there was something that I heard that I really liked, which is follow the leaders, right? That sort of understanding who's serving who is really, really helpful. And so that like call to your friend who has had a really successful last few years, maybe that's a great way to get your foot in the right door. So I mean, that's kind of the trickle down. It's like as much data as you can and understand what's going on. And then like, is there somebody that you can trust to kind of like set this up, followed by how do they talk about it? And then if there's any lack of certainty, you get on a plane. Like you just should, because you don't want to have an unknown, right?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's really interesting is I know a lot of supply chain leaders are coming up with maybe some mitigation plans and strategies, a la Ilya's suggestion of like, okay, if we're going to have to move this or that, or we're going to be subject to these tariffs or those tariffs. Lots of CFOs doing modeling right now. I guess in your professional opinions, like when is the right time to do or like make the investments to change? Is it like wait and see? Is that kind of what everybody's doing? Is it build the plans now, put them in a drawer, hopefully you won't need them? What kind of advice do you have for supply chain leaders out there thinking about resiliency as they kind of face the challenges of this new administration? We can even throw in the kind of the sanction risk in there too, if that would be of interest. What would be some actionable things like, and is it now or is it like wait until after January 21st?
Well, we're definitely seeing a range. On the one end, people that are already going at it full pelt. Large electronics manufacturer saying we're getting 2,000 suppliers out of China as quickly as we can, and we're just going for it. And they're going to end up more resilient the lower that dependence goes, but they're spending a lot of time and money to do it. And others are saying we're going to completely wait and see, which I would say is a little higher on the risk spectrum, but lower on the investment. And somewhere in between is teeing up other companies and having kind of finger on the trigger, doing the vetting, knowing that if and when we want to go, because tariffs get slapped on day 1 or day 10 of the new administration, we know exactly what we're doing. And in a certain sense, that may be the optimal, that sweet spot between investment and risk. Just adding to the earlier question, in the friendshoring and nearshoring, what should people do? We advise have a rigorous, robust, consistent process for vetting suppliers, and in all those steps that Philip mentioned, know that you can use external data, well centralized and organized, to run through, in our experience, at least 14 different dimensions of risk. starting with financial, but also cyber and ESG and reputational and geographic and others. And these days you can put that into a process and whip through thousands of suppliers very, very quickly. We helped the US Department of Defense vet, I think, 37,000 suppliers in the last year in multiples of the speed that they were able to do earlier. And so that is now possible with technology.
Drew, any thoughts to add?
Just, I would also add avoiding those single points of failure, right? Whether that be a node, a country of origin, anything like that. Avoid single points of failure. Moving everything to Mexico's been a hot topic for nearshoring. Moving everything to Mexico right now may not be the right, that's just creating another single point of failure. And that relationship could deteriorate as well. So having those options, creating that decision space, and then combining those risk factors with what we're calling business data or internal data, the quality assurance, the on-time delivery, and figuring out, from an operational and a resiliency scope, is this the right place to put investment?
All right.
Big hell yeah to both of those. I'm going to go a little bit operationally, because the now, later, something is like all kind of abstract, and I think literally the companies that we work with are like we're maybe just more finite, right? Like it tends to be lower volume and it tends to be maybe a different universe. The thing that works really well, the really responsible work back from a practical application. And I think that that's like a great, literally, when should you initiate a process change? And I mean, I talk to people all the time who are like running fast to deliver to the DoD, and that's not the moment, right? And those are phone calls where often I go, hey, I think you should focus. Like if you have a hair on fire problem, let me be a person trying to help you. But that process change kind of has to be at the right moment where you can put the resources into it, kind of initiate that change responsibly. And so I think it's like solid timeline, practical application as soon as you can.
All right. Well, thank you all for sharing your perspectives on building resilient supply chains. I think tariffs is a particularly hot topic. So we have another webinar next week explicitly on folks who moved their supply chains, their vendors, their CMs, their factories during the 2018 tariffs. And we'll have some experts there to share lessons learned and some of the tactics for the leaders who are thinking about those challenges. But I want to thank everybody who's come this week to join us. And we look forward to having you as guests on future Build Better webinars. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.